Welcome to SAM Conversation, an online program of South Asia Monitor. We're going to discuss today the book Afghanistan, the New Great Game, edited by Captain Alok Bansal, who's holding out the book, and the other person holding out the book is Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, and our third discussant is Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain. Let me briefly introduce our three discussants. Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain commanded the Srinagar-based 15 Corps and was the military secretary before retirement. Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia was the Director General Military Operations and Director Center for Joint Warfare Studies till not very long ago. Captain Alok Bansal is Director, India Foundation. He is otherwise an old salt sailor who's commanded warships, participated in the Operation Pawan in Sri Lanka. All three have written and commented extensively on strategic affairs. When I had the opportunity to review this book, it's the very first thing that came to my mind with the title, The New Great Game, was a very deadly game in Afghanistan called the Buzkashi, in which two teams of horsemen strive to take the carcass of a goat or a calf, because as one looks at Afghanistan from one's school days, when King Syed Shah headed the country, and one recalls it as probably that the only relatively peaceful period, because soon after that, the entry of the Russians, and then anyway, that's a long story. We'll not get into that. I will request Captain Alok Bansal to get the ball rolling. Captain Bansal, if you could please throw some light on the book, the theme, and all yours.
Thank you, sir. I think the signs and the videos that we saw on 15th August 2021, when desperate, hapless citizens of Afghanistan were running and trying to cling on to aircraft taking on from Kabul airport and falling to their death from the air, would have traumatized any sane human beings across the globe. I think so. And I think the desperation that was clearly evident from their acts actually made me think that why it's happening so. And of course, much rather than bother about the hapless citizens of Afghanistan who were crumbling, whose lives were at stake, the different countries were at that point of time actually negotiating with Taliban to provide them some sort of de facto legitimacy. Many of them were trying to fight for the riches of Afghanistan, its resources. There were countries which wanted to run the airport. There were other countries which were trying to extract minerals, etc. At a time when Afghans didn't know where to go. And today, as the situation exists, if you would have seen the BBC report which came out just 2 days back, they've talked that if nothing is done drastically, 90% of Afghanistan's population would go in stark poverty. Already there are 55% of the people who are actually suffering from this poverty. Now, this book is an attempt to basically to enlighten a lay leader. Firstly, what happened? Because I have always believed that international relations cannot be studied without studying the history of that particular place. Many people try to theorize international relations by theories of political science, but I believe that international relations or the present geopolitical scenario can only be studied best when you read the history. So the book starts with the historical narrative, covers how Afghan identity has evolved, because Afghanistan as a nation state is not a very old entity. It's actually just over 200 odd years old. Before that, nobody talked of Afghanistan as such, the term as it is being called, though of course it was vaguely referred to by outsiders as early as 14th century, but the locals started calling Afghanistan as Afghanistan less than 200 years ago. So basically we have covered the history, and then of course we have seen what has happened. Why did America pull out? Because this pulling out of America from Afghanistan has raised serious questions. There are so many conspiracy theories being worked out. Also, America's pulling out of Afghanistan has, of course, diminished its stature in the global community of nations. So, what is going to be America's world after Afghanistan withdrawal? How one perceives Afghanistan in changing time. And of course, the most important country which played a role was Pakistan, whose ISI was hand in gloves with the Taliban militants. Please remember, when Taliban reached the gates of Kabul, their spokesperson from Doha said that our fighters will wait outside. But ISI ensured that Taliban entered Kabul on 15th August 2021 when India was celebrating its 75th Independence Day. So there was actually a deliberate attempt. Pakistan has been involved. Pakistan has created this Frankenstein's monster, and how it will deal with it in times to come. Of course, General Bhatia has written about it in an excellent way. Taliban and terrorism have a symbiotic relationship. In fact, Taliban and Al-Qaeda have a symbiotic relationship, which the relationship cannot be snapped. The Americans were naive to think that there can be a division between Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So Zalmay Khalilzad may have negotiated anything, but there is no symbol, no sign which has emanated from Afghanistan which says there's going to be a difference between Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So we have to look at Taliban's terror machines, Taliban's linkages with terrorism, how this is going to happen. And whatever happens in Taliban or whatever happens in Afghanistan will eventually have a fallout in the region. Because Taliban is an ideological entity. It is not an entity which defines itself in terms of a territory. So an ideological entity will radiate this ideology across the so-called geographical frontiers of Afghanistan. And then eventually there has to be an impact on India. And if it has to have an impact on India, the region which will be affected the most is going to be Jammu and Kashmir. So, yeah.
Come again, sorry, we missed that. The region which is going to be affected most
is going to be Jammu and Kashmir. And
yes,
I think that is what General Hasnain has actually described.
Yes, of course, of course.
And of course,
yes.
We have discussed the humanitarian crisis that is actually unfolding in Afghanistan. And of course, the global community has a question mark as to how to ameliorate the sufferings of the Afghans without in any way legitimizing Taliban. So that's a very, very big question mark in front of the global community. How do we do that? India is trying to work out. We have given large quantities of medicines. We have actually provided vaccines, and we are also willing to supply foodstuff. So this particular book has chapters by different authors. We have 14 different authors who have contributed to 13 other chapters besides the introduction, which I have penned down, which probably gives a theme. And we have authors from both Afghanistan as well as Pakistan, besides, of course, the Indian authors. So this book enlightens any lay casual reader firstly about what happened in Afghanistan, why it happened, and how do we see the events unfolding from here. What could be the impact on India? What could be the impact in Afghanistan? What could be the impact on Pakistan for that matter, and other countries of the region? So that is what we have tried to work out, though of course, because at this point of time, different countries of the world are looking at Taliban in a different manner. Unlike 96 to 2001, when Taliban was by and large a pariah, and other than UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, no other country ever recognized them. This time there are already 10 embassies which are functioning in Kabul. They may not have recognized Taliban, but de facto recognition has already been accorded. The Taliban's foreign minister was taken for OIC summit by Pakistan's foreign minister. He was also taken for the meeting where the special envoys on Afghanistan of the big powers, that is US, Russia, China, had actually congregated in Pakistan. So the global community have to think as to what is the way ahead. What do they want? Are they willing to cohabit with a beast called the Taliban, which is actually hand in gloves with Al-Qaeda? So these are the questions that we wanted to be answered. And I'm happy to say that our authors have done an extremely good job of bringing out for writing this within a very, very short span of time, because you would appreciate that this book had a timeline. Here, I'd just like to mention one more thing, which I just take 1 minute, sir, because I'm overshooting. But I just want to tell you that this book was initially conceptualized by Sri Shakti Sinha, a person who I had known for over 37 years and who had lived in Afghanistan for a number of years. And to my mind, he understood Afghanistan better than any other Indians. Regrettably, just when he was trying to lay down how to go about with this book, he passed away.
His death was quite a surprise, very sudden and very sad.
It's actually sad and shocking, and consequently, of course, the onus fell on me to take this book forward, and my publisher helped me do that. And we I can say emphatically that my authors have done an extremely good job, and we have a fairly good book in hand, considering the constraints of the time that we have.
Thank you, Alok. That's you've you know, like I said, you got the ball rolling, but there is so much to dwell about in Afghanistan. I cannot but recall confronting General Peter Pace, who'd come here to India sometime in the early, I think it was 2002, and addressing a large gathering in the USI, United Services Service Institution. He was holding forth on what they're doing, you know, in Afghanistan. I couldn't help asking him. I said, your entry into Afghanistan is probably, for a change, has a very large part of the world approving it. But what did you do after that? You dissipated all that by going into Iraq. And now, where do you think you stand? Oh, we'll stay the course. That was his claim then. And when the Americans left, it was a rude shock to a lot of us. It was a rude shock to, I think, a lot of us, particularly to India, because India was one of those countries which was, you know, being used in a very very nuanced, balanced way. No feet on the ground, but a lot of support, assistance, very substantial, from food to infrastructure to training. Anyway, General Hasnain, please give us firstly, you know, related to your own chapter in the book, the fallout for Jammu Kashmir, and then thereafter also, shed light on other aspects.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me for this wonderful webinar. Jai Hind to all our viewers. And it's an honor to be on a panel as strong as this. May I start by, first of all, paying my obeisance and remembrances for Mr. Shakti Sinha, who also proved to be a great friend. I remember from my time in Kashmir, we were always in touch with each other for many, many years. It was very, very unfortunate when we received the news. I was in Ladakh along with the Alok when we received the news in the morning that day, and we were absolutely shocked. And I only hope and pray for his soul. Having said that, I think, Anil sir, you are intending to have this session or rather this whole program in 2-3 sessions. So I will speak about my chapter, but before that, let me very briefly talk about the new grade game. You see, this term, the new grade game, is a fascinating one, which a lot of people really have not had an occasion to really read about. If there is a new grade game, there must have been an old grade game. So there was an old grade game, as everyone knows. It was in the early part of the 20th century. Essentially, the old grade game was about the same region, extended region. It was about preventing the southward flow of influence of the Russian Empire, then of course the Soviet Empire, the Russian Empire, essentially into Central Asia, this area of Central Asia, south of the area of the Pamirs, coming into what was that time considered to be the golden bird, that is India.
So
The British were most concerned. The British were most concerned that the Russians must not be able to impinge their might, not about get spheres of influence in this complete region, which will help them embed themselves in the future. This was their fear, and it was not through physicality. It was through influence. It was through influence that this whole war or this game was fought, right? Now, in the later part of the 20th century, almost the end of the 20th century, you can say this region has again gained tremendous importance. In many ways, this region is the center of the world, if you really look at it, because crisscrossing are great routes, the old Silk Route, if you remember, the Silk Route which goes across this from China, coming into India, from China going across to Europe, into Iran, Persia, and into the Middle East. So it's a lot to do with a crisscrossing of routes. It is all to do with infrastructure. It's a tremendous amount of roads, railroads, that is rail traffic essentially. Also about pipelines, because this is an area rich in hydrocarbons, and therefore at some stage there will be felt a necessity probably to draw out a tremendous amount of hydrocarbons from this area. So the infrastructure for that has been created. But more than anything else, the new grade game is all about ideology, because this area, Central Asia, is an area which was under the Soviet Empire or the Soviet Union at one time, when it broke up into the 15 republics. The 5 republics here constitute about 72 million Muslim population. Very, very important area of the world with Muslim population. Now, these are potential markets here. There is rich in hydrocarbons at the same time, and at the same time a public which can be influenced. It is essentially Islamic, but so far a diluted form of Islam. An effort going on to try and embed a radicalized form of Islam into this area. Just a second, so sorry. A radicalized form of Islam into this area. It has not succeeded so far. The new grade game is all about this competition, which is essentially going on. So you have influence of the Russians, of the Chinese, of the Americans. For us, it's a very, very important area. If you go to Russia and meet members of the strategic community in Russia, they will always talk about Central Asia. What worries them? 11% of the population of Russia, southern Russia particularly, is Muslim. Dagestan, Chechnya. Now, this is their greatest fear, that if radicalized Islam steps into Central Asia, and this 72 million population starts getting radicalized, the influence of that is going to flow into Dagestan and Chechnya. And they don't want that kind of a thing happening in Russia. That is why you see the Russians so hugely interested in Afghanistan. If you saw on 15th of August, when we were seeing all these things happening at that time, The Russians were the first to say, we will keep our embassy here. We were withdrawing our embassy at that time. And the Russians were one of the first to say, our embassy will remain here. You are seeing the visit of President Putin to India. 3 hours, 4 hours, he's come, made a dash and gone away. The annual Indo-Soviet dialogue, so to say. It is all about this. He knows that India is an important player in this large game which is going on in this particular area. China has entered into this in a very proactive way now. It knows that its Belt and Road Initiative is under threat. The Belt and Road Initiative is not only about economics, it's all about a strategic outreach, as we are aware, moving into Middle East, going towards Africa, going towards Europe. It wants to secure the Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, extend it into Afghanistan itself. There are minerals in Afghanistan which it has already invested in. And very importantly, the Chinese are concerned about the 22 million Muslim population in Xinjiang and do not want the flow of this influence stepping into Xinjiang. So they want to be proactive and contain it there itself. Unfortunately, in this whole game, the Chinese are under the influence and under the guidance of none other than the Pakistanis. And that is something which is highly dangerous for us. Because this, the Chinese presence in Ladakh, along with the Chinese hand in glove kind of an activity going on in Afghanistan with Pakistan, is going to embolden Pakistan in a very, very big way. And that's the tone I want to set for my portion on Kashmir. Because the Pakistanis, with this Chinese presence in Ladakh and with the guidance that they're giving to the Chinese on Afghanistan, on the Great Game, on Central Asia, etc., they seem to be getting more and more emboldened, right? Although the economy is in shambles, but they're getting emboldened. And you saw that as early as October this year, or last year, the commencement of the targeting of minorities began in Kashmir, which means that the Pakistanis are now essentially testing the waters and looking at the feasibility as to what is the Rubicon, what is the limit of tolerance for India, which is the line which they cross, India will respond to. They feel that possibly the tolerance limit of India has gone higher, because they will feel, India will probably feel the possibility of the intervention of the Chinese because of their presence in Ladakh and their greater involvement in Afghanistan as a part of the overall new Great Game. Of course, there are many more players in this. Iran is a very important player, who we have not even mentioned here. India's relations with Iran are very, very important in this whole thing. But I will leave it at this and take it on subsequently when you question me on the effects on Jammu and Kashmir, physical effects on Jammu and Kashmir because of what has happened here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hasnain. While reviewing the book, I could not help but mention that it is this old great game which actually gave rise to the British partitioning India, as brought out in a book by Aman Hingorani, who did a lot of research on the British archives after they were declassified. There are records today in British archives which give the whole process of UK, Great Britain then, of how it went about partitioning India. And that's their reason, or raison d'etre was, the Russians shouldn't get anywhere close here. Anyway, your Vinod Bhatia, your chapter, I like the title you gave it, Riding the Taliban Tiger. It's I think very apt with all that we've seen happening so far. Again, I request you to throw light on your chapter and on all other aspects of Afghanistan that we can lay bare today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Col Anil Bhat. Always a great pleasure to be on the SAM conversation. and especially with my co-panelists, a postmate friend and philosopher Hasnain, and an old war horse like Alok Bansal, and of course you're there. And this is a very important, actually, a very important subject for understanding. I will not try to even add what Captain Alok Bansal said. The 2 points which I'd like to mention are, most of us tend to be, we need to be reminded, we tend to forget that Afghanistan is our neighbor. We share a border with Afghanistan, 86 kilometers of a border with Afghanistan. That's our territories. So that is something which is to them. We are a direct stakeholder in the security and development and growth and stability of Afghanistan. Because whatever happens in Afghanistan has a direct impact on our security and on our growth and on our stability. So, and we have invested very well in the people of Afghanistan. Governments come and governments go. That is a fact in every country. But the people are the most important asset of any this thing. And Indians have gained a lot of respect in Afghanistan among the people as an investment over the years have been in the people of Afghanistan. It's not the buildings that matter. It's not what we supply. But if you look at the people, they come here for, there were 40,000 Afghanis in Delhi alone, and most of them come for medical treatment. If you go to Saket,
yes,
you find the hospitals display
very great concentration of
very great. So it is not only
in
Delhi, it is Pune also. So we have invested well. We also, trained the Afghan army, and we have a number of the senior officers have been trained in India. And of course, they have been trained, even the Taliban, some of their leaders have been trained in India. That's a separate issue altogether. But we have invested well. So the great game continues, and the great game is not coming to an end so soon. Basically, Pakistan remains an important player in this great game. And let me go back what Pakistan has. They were the frontline state, and they gained from being a frontline state of the USA. Basically, the concerns were the USSR that time, and after the break of the Soviet Union, their strategic value took a hit after some time. But then again, 2001 gave them the opportunity, and the global war on terror made Pakistan again. The strategic dominance and the prominence of Pakistan was back, because the US forces in Operation Enduring Freedom could not sustain without Pakistan as the support and as the logistic support and for the intelligence and other things. So Pakistan again took that opportunity, and Pervez Musharraf was there, and they went full hog at it. But what they did actually was, they ran with the proverbial, they ran with the hare and hunted with the hounds. And they played this great game with the USA, where they fought the global war of terror, supporting the USA, and also supported the Taliban, sponsored the Taliban, and fought the USA. So that was what Pakistan did, and Pakistan, let's face it, was strategically smart. So, and this came out very clearly after the Taliban government took over, and the DGISI, General Hamid Gul, in one of the talk shows in Pakistan, when he said, with the help of the USA, Pakistan defeated Soviet Union, and then with the help of the Taliban, Pakistan defeated the USA. What he did not say was, and which I'm sure they know, that in the, I would say in the midterm, in the mid to long term, or maybe in the near term, Pakistan with the help of Taliban will destroy Pakistan. Because Taliban today, Taliban terrorism go together, and Pakistan now cannot be away from expanding terrorism, which is going to be which Hasnain was talking about. The ideology of Taliban, the Sharia which Taliban interprets, is going to come into Pakistan, and Pakistan going to have a major increase in violence levels. And this has already been reported. If you look at, I've got some figures, and I'll go to the data. So the data is from the Pakistani side, and it just says, just a second, I'll just take out the data. Yeah, so this is from the Pakistan Institute of Conflict and Security Studies, and this in 2021, Pakistan witnessed a 56% rise in terror attacks despite a month-long ceasefire with the TTP after a 6-year decline in the violence levels. In 2014, they had the Zarb-e Azab, the operations against terrorism, and that is just prior to the ceasefire which had come into being. Because of that, they prepared for it, and Zarb-e Azab was launched, and for 6 years the violence levels were controlled. But in 2021, especially in the month of August onwards, you find that the increase of 56%. The terrorists in Pakistan carried 294 attacks, killing 388 people, including 192 soldiers, a rise of 66% in the death of the military. And also, Pakistan Army has neutralized or killed 188 terrorists. The rise started in the month of May 2020 in concert with the Taliban offensive. In August 2021, the US military was and Baluch is the most turbulent state out there. So things are not as good for Pakistan as they look out. And Pakistan has also withdrawn a reserve formation, a division from the east and deployed in the west. So that is something which really concerns us. And what really, when I say Pakistan rides the Taliban tiger, this is the old Chinese proverb that one who rides a tiger doesn't know how to dismount. So Pakistan is riding the Taliban tiger, and we see the effect of Taliban now coming into Pakistan, and India then doesn't get. India also gets affected over there. So what we should be looking at is, and it is not only J&K, I suppose. Sometimes it will go beyond J&K, the ideological spread, and like Jan Hassan keeps saying, the networks have not been destroyed. Am I right when I say that? It is the networks which are more important, and the networks of various terrorist organizations, be it the Al-Qaeda, ISS, ISIS-K, they are intact in Afghanistan. And what has actually happened is the strategic space for the terrorism has increased the off-pack region totally. It has become one region now, and the global war on terror now doesn't know where to go. There's no global war on terror, actually. Everyone's fighting by himself. And all roads to Kabul now lead, or most roads to Kabul now lead via Rawalpindi, not Islamabad, Rawalpindi, because Rawalpindi is. And we saw the formation of the Taliban government where the DGISI was there. So what the aspirations of the Afghan people were, they wanted an Afghan-led, an Afghan-owned, and an Afghan-controlled peace process. What actually they have got is a US-owned, a Taliban-led, and a Pakistani-controlled peace process. So these are the sort of dynamics which are going to play out. And when they actually pan out now, we'll see more and more violence coming into our region, from Afghanistan to Iran to the Central Asian republics, also to the West Asian, and Pakistan definitely. And Pakistan is a good buffer between India and Afghanistan. But if Pakistan gets impacted, India definitely also gets impacted at a later time frame. I'll leave it at that, and I'll come back to it later in the second session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vinod Bhatia. In fact, of late, we've heard some new, friction points coming up between Pakistan and the Taliban. And a major factor here is the IS Khorasan. It's again, I can't help feeling that what a pity it is for the people of Afghanistan. There are two scholars I know, one of whom was fortunate enough to get a lift with ambassador who's coming from there, but he's not yet been given his visa, and one who's still stuck in Kabul and with his fingers crossed. Anyway, Captain Bansal, I request you to take this further.
See, sir, I just wanted to say that when we talk of what's happening in Afghanistan, its impact, we also need to understand at this point of time, the Islamic world itself is undergoing a turbulence. There are new leaders, aspirants for leadership. Till now, for last few decades, ever since Sadat signed the agreement, Camp David agreement with Israel, the Sunni Islamic world was primarily led by Saudi Arabia, which had the moral and the financial authority and being challenged by Iran. But this point of time, you have a resurgent Turkey, which is thinking in terms of recreating a caliphate. And what has happened is that the Turkey is now arranging an organization of Turkic-speaking nations. General Atta Hasnain talked about Central Asia. Please understand, 4 of the 5 Central Asian republics speak Turkic languages. Now today, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and Afghanistan are not doing Russia's bidding, but are doing Turkey's bidding. That's one of the reasons why both Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan have been in the forefront of engaging with Taliban. The Taliban soldiers and airmen who actually and pilots who defected to Uzbekistan have not been permitted to join either side. They have been kept in Uzbekistan. There are a large number of former leaders of Afghanistan like Abdul Rashid Dostum, Ata Noor, Muhammad Mohakik, or even Sayyaf, who are in Uzbekistan, who are neither at this side nor that side. So we have a great game being played because different countries have different interests. Turkey is also trying through Qatar, which had the Taliban office, to start operating Kabul International Airport. Please understand, anybody going to Afghanistan today, if he is not from Pakistan, Uzbekistan, or Iran, or to some extent Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, has to go through air, and they have to go through Kabul Airport. So anybody who controls the Kabul Airport actually to a very great extent controls the movement of people to and from Afghanistan. So there is an attempt by Turkey to reinforce its influence in the Islamic world. So unlike the old great game, when only Russians and the British were basically, there was a tussle between the two. And of course, at times Russians tried to join with French, and at times the Britishers were trying to bring in the Qing Emperor or trying to get the Persians, or there were of course the smallest kingdoms like Bukhara, Khiva, Herat, Afghanistan, all these. This time there are multiple players. The Russia has its own interest, the China has its own interest. You have kingdoms like Saudi Arabia having a different interest in this particular country. So there is of course a hodgepodge, and there is of course a big jostling for space as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Of course, Taliban's coming to power in Afghanistan has also provided a theological legitimacy to global jihad. And this factor is often not understood, because please understand that jihad has certain theological requirements which have been fulfilled by the fact that Amirul Mu'minin now controls a certain level of territory, which actually justifies that global jihad. And that's why we see a fillip in radicalization across globe after Afghanistan has been conquered. Pakistan has tried to propagate to the world that Taliban is transformed. And many people across the globe, including in India, have bought the argument that it's a transformed Taliban. This is a Taliban 2.0 and things like that. The fact of the matter is that whatever Taliban assured during negotiating with in Doha, they've gone back on it. And their stance and posture is changing by the day. Depending on how much do they need from the international community, they are more malleable or not. At this point of time, Taliban still has some pressure because they are economically extremely vulnerable. They have no experience of governing the country, and the country is facing acute shortage of food grains, medicines, and other essential commodities. So at this point of time, they are still making certain conciliatory statements, but their actions on ground are extremely against it. Taliban talked of an inclusive government. It is the government that they have created is anything but inclusive. It has more than 50% of those who are proclaimed offenders. There is only hardly any Tajik or Uzbek, no Hazara in the government, not a single woman. So anything that they said, they are not adhering. So with such an obscurantist outfit, how should the global community deal? And that is what is important. And I think what I feel, I had summed up in the last sentence of the introduction, which I said, that the only solution lies in either weaning the Taliban away from its obscurantist ideology or strengthening the national resistance front to free Afghanistan from Taliban. So to my mind, there are only two options. Any other third attempt that anybody is thinking in terms of engaging Taliban and transforming them, I think they're living in fool's paradise.
Afghan scholars who I interacted with, who said that, I mean, his is I think a very poignant voice which came that the world now needs to get back to, which it was, this was at a time when the shock of the Americans leaving was still very, very fresh. Do you, any of you, I put this question to all three of you. Do any of you see any chance of any kind of intervention on the present Taliban government or the powers that be there?
By whom?
Atta, starting with you.
Your question, clarity in your question. Intervention by whom are you asking me to comment on?
There's no point in my
Okay,
saying
anyone.
Nation.
Okay. I'll take it, put it this way. Yes, taking it from where Captain Bansal has just left off, and I agree with him almost entirely with what he says. Couple of things which relate to the question that you have asked, and then taking it forward to my own chapter. The Taliban has well embedded itself, I would say, very strongly now, and with the Pakistani support, the Chinese overall, strategic
Yes,
presence in the
if
area.
I may, these are all a bunch of thieves.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. But there are thieves. There are thieves all over the world. Remember, there are thieves like this all over the world. You've had thieves in Venezuela. You've had thieves in North Korea, and all over the world there have been thieves. The Taliban is they are a set of thieves, a bunch of thugs, right there in the center of the world, in Afghanistan, which is one of the very, very strategically very, very important areas. Besides that, what is happening in Islam at the moment is a churn within Islam. You see, now you're seeing what Captain Bansal spoke about Turkey. The efforts going on by Turkey at the moment to upsurge, to bring in its influence, to overtake the influence of the Saudis. The Saudis are quiet completely. Through this crisis in Afghanistan, we've never even heard the name of Saudi Arabia at all. The UAE, Saudi Arabia and UAE were two countries along with Pakistan which recognized Taliban in 1996. This time we haven't even heard the names of these two countries at all. So things have changed around a lot. The influence of Turkey is huge. The efforts to bring in a caliphate from, as far as the Turkish side is concerned, these efforts are going on, and that influence is very pronounced on Central Asia. Having said that, the Taliban has realized, and this is the lesson which has gone home, a very inspirational kind of a message, that 20 years they had the patience, they held off a superpower, and they've defeated them. Now, this is the message which has gone out largely to the jihadi world, that see, you don't have to have the best, finest weapons of the world. You don't have to have any. As long as you believe in Islam, as long as you continue holding on and you believe in your own ideology, everything will work out for your good. Now, this is the message which has gone home. This is the message which has gone home in Kashmir to many of the radicals who exist in Kashmir. This is the message which has gone home to the radicals in Pakistan itself. So the Taliban's presence in this current form there is a hugely dangerous thing for the world. If the Americans think that by the hurried withdrawal from Afghanistan, they have the ability to, and the Abrahamic Accords in the Middle East, that they have staved off what is happening in Islam, and they are looking at the not so peaceful rise of China by shifting focus into the Indo-Pacific, I think they're sadly mistaken. Very soon, sometime in the near future, events will once again come back in a manner in which the Americans will have to come back here again, into this region again. No one can say as to when this will happen, in what form this will happen, but the American propensity to try and move, this is the time from Barack Obama's time, this is going on, the whole aspect of refocusing, rebalancing, moving into Indo-Pacific. But every time that they have made those efforts, they've somehow always had to pull back. This time in a very unnatural way. Joe Biden tried to just extract the Americans out militarily from Afghanistan, left behind their own reputation in tatters, the strategic environment of that area completely in tatters. So what they've left behind is a very, very should you say, unstable kind of an environment in which no one would like to step in at the moment. The Russians were one people, as I mentioned in the beginning, who are extremely worried. So are the Chinese worried. So are we worried. But no one wants to step into this area, because stepping into this area means, well, you got to look at 20, 30 years of existence in that region. So I think the Taliban is there to stay for a fairly long time, and we know it's not a monolith. There will be internecine problems which will take place within
You
the
say
Taliban.
it's there to stay for some.
They are there to stay for some time, but let me tell you that within the Taliban, the internecine problems will continue. People will play proxy wars in Afghanistan. Everyone will try and establish their own influence there. We know what's happening in North Afghanistan, for example. You see, even before the Americans left, North Afghanistan, it was very clear, was emerging as the core center of terrorism in the world. You were finding all the major jihadi groups. The ISIS had already, the Al-Qaeda was already there. The Lashkar-e-Toiba has moved there. The Jaish-e-Mohammed has moved there. The East Turkestan Islamic movement has moved there. What is so important about northern Afghanistan? The essence of northern Afghanistan is there is space for a lot of people. There is money. The money comes from the drug circuits. This is the area of the Golden Crescent, as we are aware, Afghanistan, Central Asia into Turkey, Iran. This is the area of the Golden Crescent. There's a tremendous amount of money available in countries like Turkmenistan, sixth largest gas reserves of the world, selling all its gas to China. Most of the gas is being sold to China, and weak governance. So you have the terrorists can have a ball here. Absolutely. If you remember, the ISIS primarily gravitated to this area after a trial and error. They attempted to move to Philippines. If you remember the battles in Marawi, they tried to shift into Myanmar, southern Thailand, Bangladesh, did not succeed anywhere, and they finally decided to gravitate here, to settle here. So this is where they are, and this is becoming the core center of the terrorist positions in the world. There is no global war on terror at the moment, right? So this is the area from where the terrorist influences, movements, etc. will go on. It's not very far from our own territories, and therefore we are likely to be affected hugely. My last 2 minutes on this. Whenever I was questioned in Kashmir as to what is the influence of Afghanistan, events in Afghanistan on Kashmir, I would always tell them, there's a ripple effect. आप पत्थर फेंके पानी के अंदर तो ripple बनते हैं. Some of the ripples travel towards your direction. So whenever something happens in Afghanistan, the inevitable influence and outflow of that will take place on Jammu and Kashmir, and I used to stave them off. Now I'm realizing that was true. Each time something like that happens, you see the presence of the world's terrorist community in this region is obviously going to influence us. The Pakistanis are hugely, inspired by what they perceive as their success, and therefore, in connivance with China, what they would want to do in Jammu and Kashmir is anybody's guess into the near future. I would say our emphasis at the moment should be primarily looking at the business of ideology in Jammu and Kashmir. We have no idea how to fight ideology. We have no idea how to counter radicalization or fight radicalization or de-radicalize and things like that. It's gone into the roots there, and it's happening by the day. Now, the other thing is, not only is it Jammu and Kashmir, you're finding that slowly this is expanding into Punjab. You see, Punjab is becoming a ripe territory to get back. The Pakistanis are getting emboldened. They feel that they can now handle, with all the experience that they have had, they feel they can handle Afghanistan, they can handle Jammu and Kashmir, and they can handle Punjab simultaneously. Why I believe in this is, I don't think the levels of violence will increase very high. But what will happen is,
there's no doubt about the fact that
the level of violence will go up, hugely go up. And that's because of what the Pakistanis and what General Bajwa spoke of on the 6th of September. If you remember, he's speaking about fifth generation warfare. Fifth generation warfare is all about networks. It's all about, influence. They use the social media. This is what they are getting at, and they are adapted it. The ISPR is adapted it. This is the way they will wish to fight. They don't need too much money for it. The drug money is sufficient to fight this kind of a war.
Yes.
So this is something that we have to be careful about. In our case, we are extremely weak in these concepts. The whole aspect of social media, influence warfare, counter-psychological warfare. These are the issues which we need to refocus ourselves on completely. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhatia. Vinod Bhatia, what do you see anything that we can do, India can do to break this, this to break this this conglomeration of all the players, the Taliban, the Pakistanis, the Khorasanis, and let's not forget the Chinese. I think, what comes to mind is that there's some way that we have to think of to try at least to neutralize it. Is there anything we can think of?
Yes, I think India will have to first look inwards internally and also externally both. And in addition to what General Hasnain said, let me also add Kerala to it. Kerala is a brewing problem, and if we don't actually look at Kerala, I think we have a problem which is radicalization, which is very much taking roots in Kerala. And we are talking of a big problem out there in the years to come. But also, and getting back to Afghanistan and Pakistan, I think the Pakistan is strategically smart. It will. My apprehensions are twofold. One is the Pakistan deep state, and second is the Pakistan terrorist organizations. And if the two of them are hand in glove, and the worst case scenario is Pakistani terrorists getting hold of a nuclear weapon.
Of course, that's an apprehension we've had for long.
This is a reality we have to live with. And this is not only, and like General Hasnain said, Barack Obama has already stated this earlier. And President Joe Biden also in his 31st August speech has alluded to it. It's not that people are not aware of it. Everyone, the nation is aware of it. The worst case scenario, and many in the Indian strategy committee says, oh, it's not possible. Well, anything is possible and everything is possible. We cannot say that it's not possible. While we hope for the best, we should be prepared for the worst. And if that happens, the most affected nations would be, I think, the US and India, looking at the ideology of what's happening. So that is something we'll have to actually cater for, and we'll have to work with the nations with conflicts of interest like the US in the West, Israel for that matter, Iran, because Iran, the Iran threat we don't play up actually. Iran is a major friend in this, and of course the CAR countries are there. The second thing which I apprehend is Pakistan manipulating the Chinese with attacks on China's assets and interests, the CPEC, because CPEC is central to the China dream of the BRI. And if the Chinese assets and interests continue to get attacked, and the Pakistan deep state has put the ISIS very good. Let's not deny that fact. And they manipulate so that they show it as an Indian. They get Indians involved in that, and Chinese are convinced that it's the Indians who are doing it. Then we have a major problem on our hands. We already have the Chinese knocking on our door, the line of actual control. We have the Pakistan terrorism there, and the spread of terrorism which can come more eastwards. And if Chinese are convinced that in the interest to support Pakistan, and they try to convince Pakistan, and also let's not forget the strategic value of Pakistan vis-a-vis Afghanistan, because the strategic corridor which the Chinese are planning of the BRI runs from Pakistan and goes to Kabul. It's a separate issue that corridor itself will get, it goes through Taliban-controlled territory. And when the Chinese start getting attacked, they're not going to like it. Are we seeing 2-3 things? One, we see more and more Chinese presence in Pakistan. That is one. And we see China-Pakistan nexus against India, 2. And 3, we see the worst case scenario of the terrorists taking more control of Pakistan's interests and more say in the Pakistan army and the Pakistan governance, and getting hold of an odd nuclear, material, nuclear weapon, and threatening the world. It's not the use that matters; it's the threat of the use, threat of employment of a thing. And if they can say that they have it in a credible, if they can prove it in a credible way that they have a nuclear weapon which they are capable of employing or destroying, then look at what's going to happen to the world. So they want to change the world in this particular fashion.
Alok, is there? I mean, as I see it, there's so many aspects that come to mind. But can we take on any other? No, your audio.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sir, that what everything has been said, there is one issue which I want to say. I think, and what General Hasnain said, that we are not prepared for a lot of things that we could face, the fifth generation warfare. One thing which we need to understand is that very often while dealing with Taliban and Afghanistan, we don't understand the ideological aspect of it. We call them just a bunch of thieves, bunch of this. They may be anything, but they're ideologically committed, especially the top leadership. And we need to understand that when a beast is ideologically committed, it's actually a committed beast. So we need to understand the ideology. And if you have to actually, as General Hasnain said, if you have to de-radicalize, if you have to do some actions as far as your own country is concerned, you need to understand the ideology that drives them. And then only can you counter that particular ideology. Regrettably, most people in India do not understand the ideology, and as a result, they often treat Taliban as just any other frivolous geopolitical actor. And that's one of the reasons that many in India today are advocating that we should talk to Taliban. To my mind, there can be nothing more disastrous than engaging and providing legitimacy.
I think anything else that you'd like to add, General Hasnain? Vinod?
I would only draw attention of our audience to one thing, which we tend to keep forgetting. The Taliban is essentially Pakistan's baby. You see, 1980-81, we need to just look at briefly at the historical aspect. 1977, when Zia came to power, Zia was born with what I always say, with the silver spoon. In 2 years' time, all those major events happened in the Islamic world. You know, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the revolution in Iran, and all that which happened in Makkah at that time.
Yes.
No, Pakistan became the frontline state, as we are aware, and using human resources to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. The cultivation which took place was of nothing else but the Taliban. You see, all the madrasas which came up on the Western Front, 3 million refugees which came out from Afghanistan, these were the people who were at that time 20, 21 years old, who took the money from the Pakistanis, who took the weapons from them, took the drug money from them, and went in and fought. Now, they are the ones who grew up by 1996 to come to power as the Taliban. So they are beholden to Pakistan in a very, very big way. No doubt, the Haqqani network and other networks, all of them are hugely beholden to the Pakistanis. When you say that, is it possible to create cleavages between the Pakistanis and the Taliban? For us, I would say that's a huge challenge. May not really happen so easily. For us, our overall human resource capability to intervene in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, now that we don't even have the 4 consulates there, our embassy is not there, is something which is, I would say, something which we are looking at almost an impossibility. So we need to keep this in mind, that the Taliban is here probably to stay. Now, Alok made a very important point, which I may sometimes differ with, on this aspect of outreach. No one is trying to establish a relationship with the Taliban. But India needs to remain relevant, and it needs to be on the high table. I think Indian diplomacy must ensure that India's capability of sitting at the high table on Afghanistan must not be diluted in any way.
Yeah, fully agree with you there, but
I'm not sure how Alok would react to respond to that. I would like to listen to Alok as to what he would like to say.
I fully agree with you, but what are we doing towards that? Are we doing anything towards that?
Well, if nothing else, if the NSA, the recent NSA's meet was at least some initiative that we took, which was not a bad initiative. To get people from Central Asia. We invited Pakistan, we invited China. They didn't want to come for it. That's a different thing. We invited Iran. At least it was a beginning that we made, and we started to feel the relevance of India returning into this whole domain.
I just wanted to say 2 things, sir. One is, of course, when I said that we should not legitimize Taliban, I'm not trying to say that we should not reach out to them. The intelligence agencies have reached out to them from 96 to 2001 also. They can reach out to them now also, and they have been reaching out to them when they were in Qatar. But we should not do anything which legitimizes Taliban and makes our friends in NRF and others who are outside Afghanistan feel that India too has betrayed them, because they suffer from a deep sense of betrayal from the United States. They feel that they feel that the US has betrayed them, that we should not make them. The second issue, and which point we need to understand, is what we need to do, what we can do. There are a lot of things. But the point is, a lot of people at this point of time in India are advocating relations with Taliban as if nothing has happened. They are saying that Taliban can be distanced from Pakistan. Yes, there will be conflict between Pakistan and Taliban also. There have been border disputes of Afghanistan in last few months with Pakistan, with Iran, with Turkmenistan. But whether they were genuine disputes, or as Amrullah Saleh says, that the conflict at the fence, destruction of fence on the Pakistan border was a stage managed show by the Taliban to project to the domestic audience that they are a nationalist force, which is now under question mark because Taliban changed the flags, etc. There has been an opposition rallying around the old flag of Afghanistan. So they have been probably trying to show by the stage managed show of destroying a certain part of the fence that they are actually nationalists. So we need to be careful as to what actually is being done. Now, please understand, for Taliban, even if it wants to, it will be extremely difficult to dilute its ideology. The second fact which must be understood very clearly is that if Taliban actually comes to a lasting peace with the US and the West, then Al-Qaeda's jihad becomes theologically delegitimate, because Al-Qaeda's jihad is intended to be waged under Amirul Mu'minin. Now, if the so-called Amirul Mu'minin only comes to a negotiated settlement with so-called Dajjal of the jihadis, then what happens? Then where is the jihad? So the jihad becomes theologically delegitimate. Now, this theological dimension is often not understood by geopolitical analysts, and consequently, very often they tend to trivialize it.
Anything you'd like to add, Vinod?
No, I think I agree that we have to sit at the high table and we have to be relevant.
I will
Our
end
relevance
here.
cannot be questioned actually, and we have to have the we got to be there at the high table as Afghanistan concerned.
No doubt. There's no doubt about that. And I hope we can work things to that end. It will take some doing, but there's the Indian mind is capable. I only hope it shows its capability in politically, prevailing. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think it was a very stimulating discussion on a very complex subject. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.